Welcome back, anthropology students. This third topic of the semester will discuss religion and ritual. First, I will provide a definition of religion. It is not easy to find a definition that would fit all societies of the world, but let's say it is a set of beliefs and actions. So there are things you believe in, things you do in a religion, and they are related to the supernatural. When I mention the supernatural, I'm not thinking about aliens or ghosts. I'm thinking about anything that is beyond science, beyond nature, beyond a scientific or a natural explanation. There's an important question that anthropologists try to answer, and this question is, where do human religions come from? They exist all over the world. They vary from culture to culture, but they are there. It's a need in human beings. So where did they come from? Why do they exist in all human societies? Some people will tell me religions come from God. That's a silly question to ask. But in social science, we always try to find answers in humans. So there is a reason why human societies do practice religions. Early anthropologists had their point of view on that. Those who thought that societies have evolved from savagery to civilization, and they had a so-called evolutionary point of view on the so-called evolution of societies. We know that this is not true. Societies do not evolve, but they had their point of view on religions. And they also had an evolutionary point of view on religions. This means that religions would have evolved from something more simple. So in their evolutionary point of view, they saw magic first used in human societies, and later on in this PowerPoint, I will discuss what magic is. So for them, it would have started with magic, then turned into religion, evolved into religion, and then evolved into science, what societies use to explain the world, each one being more rational than the preceding one. This does not work because all societies of the world, from the most simple society to the most complex society, use the three things: magic, religion, and science. Magic is used by all societies of the Western world, which are very developed politically and economically. Take, for example, this goaltender you see on the picture. He is Patrick Roy. I don't know if you watched hockey in the 1990s and the early 2000s, but this guy was a goaltender for the Montreal Canadiens and Colorado Avalanche. And it was very interesting to see him at the beginning of each game because he was talking to his posts of the net and doing all sorts of rituals with the posts, asking them clearly to help him stopping the pucks. So this is what we call using magic in anthropology. A lot of people do use magic in the Western world in developed societies. So all societies use magic. All societies use religion to different extents, and all societies use science. We're not the only ones using science in the developed world. All societies of the world do use science. They observe nature. They try to use nature to fill certain needs. For example, if you have a foraging society, which is very simply organized politically, they have a very simple subsistence, and suddenly there's a crisis, there's something happening to them. There's a skin rash going around, there's a parasite or something. And someone knowledgeable thinks that, oh, this plant will stop the rash, will cure people. So they try it and it works. If you make a plaster with that plant and you put it on the skin, it works well. So you formulate a hypothesis there. Oh, this plant works, it cures the rash. So next time the rash happens, then you will try the plant again. And oh, it will work. So then you use the scientific method. I have a hypothesis, I test it, it works, hypothesis confirmed. This is very simple science, but it is using science. All societies of the world use science. All societies of the world use magic, religion, and science. So there was no evolution from one to the other. Early anthropologists also had an evolutionary point of view concerning the classification of religions. For them, so-called primitive societies had practiced animism. And then some societies went further and they developed polytheism, and only in the civilized world people discovered monotheism. Actually, the classification is correct. These are three different kinds of religions, depending on what we consider sacred or divine. But the evolutionary point of view is not. There was no evolution from animism to polytheism to monotheism. It's a cultural choice to use one or the other. Now I have to explain what these three words mean. Animism means that it's the belief that some natural elements are invested with divine life or life or a spirit. For example, in some animist religions, animals will have a spirit that is eternal. In some other religions, it can be animals and plants or natural features as mountaintops, rivers, stars, the sun, the moon, etc. So different things or beings in nature would have a spirit here. This is animism. Polytheism means having many gods or deities in a religion. Poly means many. Monotheism means having only one god. So we still haven't answered our question, where do religions come from? Why do they exist in human societies? I will explain four theories, four different ideas on the origin of religious thought, the origin of religions in human societies. The first one is by Claude Lévi-Strauss, a French anthropologist. Lévi-Strauss had the idea that religion is very useful to provide ways of explaining the world. Religions have myths of creation. Human beings need to understand where they come from. We need to explain creation. We need to explain what's happening to us. We need to explain the world, and we need to explain problems that happen. Imagine early societies a long time ago living in the natural world and observing all sorts of phenomena, seasons, earthquakes, tornadoes, disease around. They had to explain these things. And they were not able to explain with science. Science was not developed enough. They had no knowledge of tectonic plates and the solar system, so how would you explain seasons or earthquakes here? So God and the spiritual world and the supernatural were very useful to explain the world. Same thing for today. We understand a lot of things thanks to science. Science had developed tremendously, but there are still things that we do not understand well, and there are still things that even if we understand them, it's hard to accept. Think about climate change. We understand how it works, but it's hard to accept. The COVID-19 crisis we're in now, we understand where it comes from, but we can't accept what we are doing to nature, because sometimes God is a very useful explanation for these very complex things that we see around us and that we cannot explain. And some things we just can't explain. We don't have the scientific proof of it. Think about the Big Bang, for example. There's a theory. Scientists can explain it, but it's theory. So a lot of people would prefer philosophy or religion to explain the origins of universe. We can explain somehow scientifically how life started on Earth, but religion is really easy or very useful to explain the existence of life as well. So still today, there are things that we can't totally explain with scientific proof or easy scientific proof to understand. So God and religion provide answers here. Same thing for life and death. Um, Even with science, it is impossible to really understand the passage between life and death. Where do we go when we die? Where were we before we were born? All these very difficult questions are easily explained with religion and very hard to explain with science. So human beings develop the concept of spirit, of soul that doesn't die, that goes somewhere after we die and maybe come back to life, depending on the religion we practice. Human beings have developed all sorts of rituals around birth and around death, funeral rituals that vary a lot around the world. It's all linked with our need to explain life, death, and to use the supernatural to explain that. So religion is useful, according to Levi-Strauss, to explain things that otherwise could not be explained in human societies. Bronislaw Malinowski, American anthropologist, had a different point of view on the origins of religions in human societies, but not contradictory. For Malinowski, religion is very useful to help people dealing in life with situations of uncertainty. That's the most important word here. Uncertainty, stress, anxiety. He did fieldwork at the beginning of the 20th century in the Pacific Islands in Oceania. And he noticed something pretty important for his theory. He noticed that fishermen, when they were going fishing close to the shore, very safe environment, very easy fishing. When they were going there, they were not in danger. They were in control of everything around them. So they were not using religion before going fishing. But when they were going in the open sea with their little boats, as you see the one here on the left, it was dangerous. There were waves, there were unpredictable sea currents, there were maybe predators down there. It was uncertain, it was stressful, it was dangerous. So when they were doing that, they were using religion before leaving the shore. They were using prayers, they were using different rituals in this case. So Malinowski thought religion helps them reducing their anxiety before they go do something dangerous, because they will do something that is unpredictable in their lives. So this religion helps with that. It's a mental process here. And not only individually, but collectively as well. There are situations of not only individual stress, like going fishing alone in the open sea, but there's situations of collective stress as well. In these traditional villages, a situation of collective stress or collective uncertainty would be maybe a natural disaster where the crops are destroyed, or there's a chief who dies and who's going to be the chief now, and all sorts of questions that bring collective anxiety, collective uncertainty. People dealt with these situations using religion. We still live today with a lot of situations of personal anxiety, personal uncertainty. You're not sure what's going to happen to you individually or sometimes collectively. I take again the crisis of COVID-19 now. We don't know what's going to happen in the next weeks, in the next months. That's a collective stress, a collective anxiety we have. So a lot of people will use religion to help them in these situations, to help themselves individually and collectively as well. And I've seen something interesting in New York in 2008. I was living in New York precisely on that year. And during the economic crisis in the fall, there was a huge economic crash all over the world. And the gas price in New York went up from $2 something a gallon to $8 a gallon. This was in New York in a few days or a few weeks, I don't remember, but a short period of time. So the gas price rising tremendously. And people don't control the gas price. It's impossible to control individually or collectively, and it affects people's lives a lot, not only because it's more expensive to travel, but everything in life gets more expensive, and people were losing their jobs and losing their homes at the time. So I've seen something interesting anthropologically in New York. I've seen people holding hands and praying at gas stations. So they were collectively doing something to help their lives a little bit in a situation of very high uncertainty. Malinowski is not alive anymore, but he would have been very happy to see that. His theory, a perfect illustration of his theory in modern times. Émile Durkheim was a French sociologist. Maybe you are learning about Durkheim in sociology right now. He also had a very interesting point of view concerning the origins of religions and the functions of religions in human societies. So for him, early societies already understood how beneficial it is for society to have a good internal cohesion. It's not good for a society to have internal divides and internal conflicts. So what we want is social cohesion, so we can achieve things, we can develop society to make something better. So early societies and even today's societies develop symbols to represent the group. They can be visual symbols, but they can be any kinds of symbols, prayers, for example. And early societies, and us as well, developed rituals to maintain this social cohesion, to maintain this social whole that continues to work together. So there, it's not only with the supernatural or the faith that this work, it's about anything. When everyone in society worships the same gods or have the same deep opinion on something, then the society goes better. And it was used a lot for Durkheim by early societies in the domain of faith and spirituality. Collective worship was and is still important. So if everyone in the group does the same thing, believes in the same gods, in the same myths of creation, in the same explanations to explain the world, then societies has more cohesion. It works in modern society, not only with religion, but with a lot of different aspects around us. Look at how there's more social cohesion after a big snowstorm where everyone helps each other, taking their car out of the snow and taking food to other people who are stuck home. And a snowstorm brings social cohesion because it's a situation where everyone is and everyone works together for the same goal. Well, the same applies to religion. Karl Marx was a philosopher born in Germany. He was not an anthropologist, but his ideas are used a lot in anthropology. Marx was not a very big fan of religions. He had a very different point of view from the three scholars we have seen so far. He has a famous quote about religion. I don't know if you're aware of it. It is, religion is the opiate of the masses, which means more or less religion kills your ability to criticize society. Religion numbs people. For Marx, and you know that Marx was a very important figure of socialism and communism. Marx saw religion as a tool that could be used and was used by the elite to manipulate lower classes of societies. So you know that, as we discussed with Durkheim, with religion, everyone in society, despite of their different social class, would practice the same rituals, will believe in the same God or saints or supernatural figures. So religion is a link that unites different social classes. And for Marx, the upper class, the elite, was using this link on purpose to numb people from the lower classes, to manipulate them. Because religion masks class inequalities, it would help prevent any revolution, any uprising against the elite. So it was helping the elite a lot by comforting the poor, comforting the lower classes that struggle, and would help the elite staying in power. So anytime you read such things as the religion is used on purpose by the elite to manipulate people, well, this is a Marxist idea. The ideas expressed by the four preceding scholars about the origins of religions are still used today, but they date from the first half of the 20th century. There is a more recent theory to explain the origins of religious thought in human beings, and this theory, by McLennan, an anthropologist, is called the ritual healing theory. It is a little bit controversial because it makes a link between the biological evolution of human beings and psychological traits present in modern humans. And everything that makes a link between biological evolution and what's in the psychology of human beings is controversial. But it's a theory that is used a lot in anthropology. In order to understand the theory, one has to know a little bit about the theory of natural selection by Darwin. And I'm sure you've heard of this one. I don't have anything in the slides to explain it, but I will just say a few words about it before I start explaining the ritual healing theory. So Darwin wrote his theory of natural selection in the 19th century. I'm sure you have heard the phrase, the survival of the fittest. It's not from Darwin, actually, but it summarizes well the theory. In a population of animals, of early humans, hominids, each individual is different. We all have different traits, physical traits, and traits that are not very visible in the body, but that differentiates us. So some of these traits are favorable for some environments and some are not. Example of traits that are different in each individual: shape, color, resistance to disease, speed, all physical traits you can think of, fat percentage in the body, the ability to digest milk, anything. We are very different from each other. So and these differences are hereditary in bodies, in individuals. We transmit it to our offspring. So in a population of animals, hominids, those with favorable traits that help them survive will have more offspring. Those with good traits according to a given environment. If there's a predator around, if you have good camouflage, if you're fast, if you can climb trees better, well, you will survive better. And you have good traits. You're fit for the environment. So those individuals that are the fittest to survive in a given environment, well, will reach reproductive age easier, will have more offspring, and they will transmit their genes to the next generations. They will contribute to the evolution. Those individuals that do not have the favorable traits to survive in a given environment either will die in infancy, will not survive well, will not survive very old, and if they survive to reproductive age, they will have less offspring that in turn will survive. So they will transmit no genes in the next generations, or a few genes to the next generations, and they will not contribute so much to the evolution of a species. So the next generations look like the older generation that has transmitted the favorable traits. So the species evolve to be more fit to a given environment. So the ritual healing theory is based on the natural selection theory. On that slide here, I have a summary of the theory. The use of traditional healing rituals by early humans, and I will explain what it is, selected for genes in their DNA that would have provided good psychological traits that were fit, that were making them fit to survive. And these psychological traits are the base for religious beliefs. So according to the theory, the need we have for faith, for religious, for propensity, has a genetic base in human beings. This is a summary of the theory. Then I will explain it step by step. As you know, many human societies today, or nearly all human societies, use to a certain extent traditional healing methods, what we call here alternative healing methods, to heal sickness. So, for example, hypnosis, energy work, trance, and all these methods that would use a state of altered consciousness, and that involve a little bit of placebo effect. They're used a lot today, and they were used in the past by early humans, and they were the only used by our primitive ancestors. Now I can use the word primitive because I'm talking about pre-Homo sapiens and early Homo sapiens that would not have finished yet the biological evolution. So these traditional healing methods were the only ones known a long time ago. These traditional healing methods used different processes like hypnosis, like trance, like the use of drugs, and different states of altered consciousness. And as it is in modern populations, some individuals responded better to these treatments, were more easily reaching these states of altered consciousness. I don't know if you have seen a show by any hypnotizer. What they do first, they try to hypnotize the crowd. So they ask people to, for example, join their fingers together, and then they try to hypnotize them. Or your fingers are glued forever, you can separate them at the count of 3, your hands are glued, etc. And then they count 1, 2, 3, and some people just cannot separate their fingers. They're hypnotized. And some other people, well, it doesn't work for them. So we're all different. We all have a different ability to be hypnotized, to reach that state of trance, of hallucination, of altered consciousness. And it was the same in the past. All pre-Homo sapiens and early Homo sapiens were different. So some of them did respond better to these early healing treatments, and some did not respond. Those who responded better to these traditional treatments, to these states of altered consciousness, we call them more suggestible here. They recovered better from sickness and injuries. Now, traditional healing doesn't cure everything. It won't cure cancer. It won't cure a very serious disease. It won't cure a broken skull or a broken, hip. But it works to a certain extent for some sicknesses and injuries. For example, these sicknesses that are worsened by stress, it will work a little bit to help that. It helps with injuries as well because it's very good for pain management. So imagine a population of early Homo sapiens, they're nomadic. So some people get injuries, they're not able to follow the group. Some people don't feel well, they're not able to follow the group. Well, if they respond well to these traditional healing methods, they will be able to follow the group. They will recover better from these minor illnesses. So they will reach reproductive age, they will have more offspring, they will be able to take care of their offspring, and they will transmit more genes in the population. And it's the opposite for those who were less suggestible. They did not recover well from minor sicknesses, illnesses, from injuries. The traditional healing did not work for them. So they left fewer offspring. They did not contribute so much to the evolution. And in conclusion, this suggestibility, this hypnotizability, this ability to reach a state of altered consciousness, this, I don't know how to call it, open-mindedness, or it's linked with a tendency for religious belief. Because what really is religious belief? It's believing in something you don't have any proof of. It's believing in something supernatural. So you need this ability to reach another state to be very faithful in religion. And according to the theory, biological evolution made all humans more suggestible because those who more easily reach this state of altered consciousness transmitted more offspring, contributed a lot to the evolution. And not only a few humans in a few countries, but all humans, because we are all descendants of these early Homo sapiens. So, according to the theory, the ability to have religious belief is in human DNA, is in human nature because of biological evolution. Now we'll say a few words about magic and how it is different from religion. Sometimes it's not easy to determine what is magic and what is religion because the frontier between these two concepts sometimes is not so clear. The definition of magic would be people's attempt to use the supernatural. The key here is using it in order to achieve some goals on themselves or on other people. So here the key word is using the supernatural more than believing here. Magic is based more on the individual, whereas religion is based more on the collective, on the community. Of course, there are individual actions in religions. Think of praying, for example. And there is something collective in magic sometimes when a whole community believes in the same magic actions. But there is a focus more on the individual with magic and on the collective with religion. Magic is based a little bit more on rituals, whereas religion is more ideological, spiritual, and based on faith, on ideas. Of course, there are rituals in religions, and magic is based on believing in something. But there's a focus here again. Magic focuses more on the ritual side, whereas religion focuses more on the ideological side. Magic is not based on the existence of a god, whereas religion usually is based on the existence of one or many gods. Now I will mention three different kinds of magic. There are many ways to classify kinds of magic, but I will use one that is commonly done by scholars. And they can overlap a little bit. The first one that we do not use so much in our community is what we call imitative magic. This is using something, an effigy, an image, something that looks like a person to do something, either good or bad, to that person, to influence his or her life. When I mention that in class, students always give the example of voodoo, which is totally correct. It's a magic practice based on the effigy of someone. There is not only voodoo, there is more examples of imitative magic, and sometimes it's not necessarily with the goal of actually doing some good or harm to a person. It's to feel better. You have surely seen during protests people burning the effigy of a political or a religious leader, like in the image here. Of course, the person who's burning the effigy of Donald Trump knows he's not burning the guy for real, or if it won't happen for real, it won't kill the person or harm the person for real. But it's a message that is passed here. It makes you feel better, like burning the picture of your ex-boyfriend or girlfriend. Sometimes vandalism on electoral posts, electoral pictures before elections are kind of imitative magic. You draw bullet holes on the forehead of a political leader while you wish some harm to the person. Imitative magic here. Contagious magic is different, is to use something that was once in contact with a person or once touched by a person or even once part of the body of a person, like hair or nails, to influence the life of that person. This is based on the belief that there is a permanent link between someone and a part of the body of that person or something that they have touched. A good example of it, I've seen that in the Andes, in the high mountains of Bolivia, in very traditional villages where women brew corn beer. So only women do that in these villages. They make beer with corn, and at one part of the process, they have to filter the beer through some fabric. And they use one of their clothes they have worn to filter the beer, and they believe that by doing so and by doing the giving the beer to a boy, a man, the man can fall in love with them. It's kind of a love potion. This is a good example of contagious magic, using something that was once in contact with yourself to do something to another person through some substance here. In some countries, in some communities, you will be very careful if you cut your nails or your hair, because someone might be using it to do witchcraft that could harm you. That's another example of contagious magic. Sometimes contagious magic and imitative magics are linked together in some voodoo practices, for example, where you will integrate hair from a person into the doll that represents that person. The third kind of magic is what we call in anthropology sequential magic, and this is the most commonly used here in our society. I have a kind of a complex wording here on that slide to say something very easy. It's assuming that when I do something and something else happens, if I do that thing again, the second thing will happen again. There is a sequence. Or if I avoid doing something and something happens, it's good. I will avoid doing that thing again, so the second thing happens again. We call that superstition in our culture, but it's a kind of magic we call sequential magic. It's based on something you do or something you avoid doing, like we call that a taboo, something you avoid doing. Sometimes it becomes fashion. For example, these play of facial hair that you see these days during the hockey playoffs or basketball playoff. It's based on a taboo, on a superstition, on sequential magic. I win and I don't shave, so I will avoid shaving because it will make me lose. And the players, as they go further in the playoffs, they develop these big birds. So this is sequential magic, but it becomes fashion as well. A good example, an interesting example of that is Jason Terry. He was a player of the Boston Celtics until a few years ago. And he had an interesting practice of magic. Before a game, he was wearing special shorts. So when he did that first, it made him win. So he continued doing the practice. If I wear specific shorts for sleeping, then the day after I won, well, I will wear the shorts again for sleeping, so I will win again. Superstition, sequential magic, not based on something you avoid to do here, but based on something you are actually doing. And there is also a part of contagious magic on what he was doing, because he was wearing the shorts of the opposing team he would play against the day after, before when he slept, and he was wearing the used shorts full of sweat from an opposing player. I don't know how he got these shorts, but this is sequential. This is contagious magic. He was using an object that was once in contact with someone else, and he was using it to beat that person the day after. It was also sequential magic, because he did it once, it worked well, he would do it again. Okay, so far we have talked about the origins of religions, their functions in human communities, in human individuals, and also magic and the difference between religion and magic. Now we will focus on different kinds of religious practices, the components of religions. And I will use the world's 5 major religions to give my many examples. And these world's 5 major religions are the following: Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, and Buddhism. Each of these religions have a lot of subdivisions. For example, in Christianity, Catholics, Protestants, and Orthodox are the 3 major subdivisions. And I will not focus on these subdivisions of each religion. I will just focus on these religions as wholes, even if they're not. So Christianity is practiced in Europe and in places of the world that saw European conquests in the past: the Americas, Australia, New Zealand, and some countries of sub-Saharan Africa. Islam is practiced most in the Middle East, in North Africa, and in a few Asian countries like Indonesia. Judaism is practiced in Israel, this country specifically, and in all countries where there was a diaspora during the Second World War from Eastern Europe to elsewhere where Jews escaped. There's a very high population of Jews in the United States, for example. Hinduism is practiced mostly in 2 countries, India and Nepal. And Buddhism is practiced in a lot of Asian countries. The first component of religions I will mention is prayer. Everyone knows the definition of prayer, so I don't have to explain so much. Prayer means addressing the supernatural, so communicating with God or the saint or the equivalent. Examples from different religions. In the Jewish community, people are supposed to perform 3 prayers a day. Muslims are practicing 5 times a day. Same thing for Christians. We're supposed to pray 5 times a day. Most people don't do the prescribed prayers, but there are a specific number very often. Another example, people have to know, why do Muslims pray facing east? If you are here in North America, Muslims pray facing east because the Mecca is located at east, and it's the most sacred place on earth for Muslims. It's the place where their religion was born. Sometimes students tell me they face east because of the sunrise. Well, it's a coincidence. It's not because of the sunrise. Another aspect of Muslim prayer, I will explain this one more because this is what you can be in contact with in your daily life, and you have to understand why people do certain things. Muslims will not pray with their shoes. They will pray barefoot ideally, and they use a clean place. Cleanliness is very important in Islam. It is important in Christianity as well. You have to keep your soul clean. You have to get rid of your sins by being forgiven. But it goes beyond that for Muslims. Your body as well has to be clean, and that is very important. There's this notion of important cleanliness. And this is why you remove your shoes and you wash your feet and your hands and your mouth before you pray. Physiological exercise is also very common in major religions. It doesn't mean working out. It means inflicting something to your body for religious reasons. So doing something to your body. And generally, it's not something pleasant. It's something hard that will help you reaffirm in your faith and feeling closer to the divine. The most common physiological exercise is fasting. For example, Jews will fast around 6 days in the year. They're not consecutive days, but these are important Sabbaths. Christians have a fast as well. This is Lent. Lent is a period of 40 days before Easter, during which people eat at any time they want, but they have to give up something pleasant. Generally, people give up meat or sweet during Lent. Sorry, this is not a practice we do a lot anymore, but 40-50 years ago, that was really, really important. Fasting is also a very important aspect of the Muslim community. The fast is called Ramadan, and this is 1 month in the year. And this month is never really at the same time in the year because Muslims follow the lunar calendar for their spiritual life, and the lunar calendar is 11 to 12 days shorter than the solar calendar. So all important holidays and all months start and happen 11 to 12 days earlier each year. And this is why Ramadan starts a few weeks earlier every year. It lasts 28 days, a lunar month, during which people will not eat or drink before sunrise and sunset. So it's easier maybe in the winter. It's harder in the summer. Right now it's around May, so it's pretty hard. Days are pretty long, and there's a precise hour at which you have to stop eating and when you start eating again in the evening. When we ask Muslim people, why do you fast during Ramadan? There's a lot of different answers given. Some students told me in the past that's a reset time in the year in which you think a little bit more about your spiritual life, and you feel closer to God when you don't eat. It's a time where also people have to think giving to the poor, because when you fast, you're hungry, you're starving, so it's kind of putting yourself in the shoes of the poor. So you're more willing to help after. Giving to the poor is one of the 5 pillars of the Muslim religion. Okay, so this is for fasting. This is a not such an extreme practice, but it's very common. Religions have more extreme practices for physiological exercise. An example of it that a student gave me at the beginning of the semester was some people in the Hindu religion walk on embers. Yes, this happens, but it's not a common practice, first, and it's done by only some specific ethnic groups in India, some branches of the Hindu community, and they don't do that all the time. It's not a practice something do in their backyard in the weekends. Let's walk on embers. It's something very special they do to honor a goddess. and they don't harm themselves too much. It's spectacular when you watch it, but they practice a lot, and they start on cooler embers, and then as they get better, the embers are warmer and more and hot. And also they wet their feet when they start, and they go faster, so they can develop very thick callus under their feet that help them supporting the heat. So it's not something, it's not self-destruction. Okay, it's a religious practice. It hurts, but not, you know, to an extreme point. A very painful one I think of is Christians. If you live in the Philippines and you are very serious with your faith, during Good Friday, you can be a volunteer to be crucified. It's not suicide, you don't die, but you're actually nailed on a cross and put there, put that in a specific place during a certain amount of minutes. Adult men do that. Men do that only, and well, it's real suffering there, and it's called religious ecstasy. It's when you hurt your body a lot to feel your faith and to express your faith. So these are all examples of what we call physiological exercise. It's doing something to your body to express your faith. The third one is a complicated word for something very easy. Exhortation means that some people in their religious hierarchy are closer to the divine, and they would use this special status they have to preserve doctrine, to help people, and to give good example. Examples of that in Christianity, you have priests and nuns. For Catholics, have all this full hierarchy of priests and bishops and archbishops and cardinals and the Pope. So these are all people in the religious hierarchy being closer to the divine and using it to teach people religion and give good example, or they're supposed to. In Islam, there's imams, rabbi in the Jewish community, and monks in other religions. So this is also very common. It's called exhortation. Number 4 is mana. It means that some objects or substances are invested with supernatural powers, with divine powers, that can either be transferred to you or that can protect you if you touch these objects or substances. I have 2 examples here in the pictures from Christianity. The girl on the left has ashes on her forehead. This happens during Ash Wednesday, which is the first day of Lent, during which they do that a lot in the United States, actually. The priest will remind you that dust you are, and to dust you shall return after your death. It's a sign of humility, and it's also a sign of divine protection to have that on your head the day of Ash Wednesday. On the right, you see a bronze statue of Saint Peter. This one is in the Vatican. Saint Peter was the first pope for Catholics. And you see people rubbing the foot of the Pope. So the foot has been touched so much by people that it's all worn out and melted. So touching here the foot of Saint Peter, it's supposed to protect people. That's another example of mana. Wearing amulets or talismans, as we call it, is also examples of mana. People do that. Holy water as well is an example of that. It's blessed water that will protect you when you touch it. This image is another example of mana with amulets. These are Senegalese wrestlers. Wrestling is the national sport in Senegal. This is in West Africa. And you see these wrestlers have these little leather bags on their bodies. This is a very ancient practice in West Africa, to have these bags filled with a substance that will protect you. Traditionally, these were natural substances put in the bags, like powdered animal horns and plants and animal hair. But Senegal became, centuries ago, a Muslim country. So now there are still traditional things inside the bags, but on top of it now, very important, they put verses of the Quran on little pieces of paper folded and inserted in the bags. So it's supposed to protect wrestlers from injuries and from bad things that could happen in battle. It won't make them win, or at least it will work for only one of them. But it is an example of mana in religion, because these are verses of sacred writing in there. Taboo is another very important aspect of religions. It means something prohibited. Religions impose prohibitions on people. And most of these prohibitions can be about everything. But a lot of these prohibitions are about sex and food. In most religions, prohibitions about sex are the same ones. No sex outside of marriage, no sex before marriage. These are very ancient rules that were helping put some order in society to help social cohesion before contraception. This was very useful. Some students mentioned also the prohibition of homosexuality in religions. The main prohibition is about same-sex marriage, actually, because marriage and sexual access to someone is the same notion in anthropology. And the reason why same-sex marriage is such a big deal in religions, it is because in most religions, the function of marriage is reproduction, and it wouldn't be possible with same-sex marriage. This is why people against same-sex marriage will often mention religion as an argument. It is because it doesn't lead to reproduction. But it is not a taboo in all religions of the world. For example, a lot of First Nations in the Americas did not have this taboo until the Christians came. Same-sex marriage was totally okay. Why not? There is no problem there. As long as the two members of the couple were not having the same gender. One of them had to switch gender to play the role of the other gender, and like that, the household was functioning totally correctly. So it's not a universal taboo. I will focus on food taboos when I explain taboos in religions, because they're the ones that you will meet a lot in your life. You will meet a lot of different people from different religions who do not eat certain things, and you kind of have to know why. I will start with Christianity. We do not have a specific food taboo in Christianity. There is no food that we are strictly prohibited to eat. But ideally, people will not eat meat on Fridays. We don't do that anymore, but it was the case until a few decades ago here in Quebec. And it is still the case in many Christian countries in the world. The reason for that is because Jesus died on a Friday, supposedly, and it's a sign of mourning, a sign of respect. Not to eat luxury things on a Friday. Christianity is a very old religion, and when this taboo was put in place, meat was something rare and it was a luxury item, so you would not eat it a day you were mourning. Now it doesn't make any sense. It has no logic. But again, do not try to find logic in religious practices. They don't have to be logic. It's very old practices that have survived through time. So the logic existed centuries ago, millennia ago, but it doesn't exist anymore. And still, it's a religious practice, so people respect it. So right now it's not logic, because meat is not so much a luxury anymore. What people do eat on Fridays, if they don't eat meat, generally they eat fish. So fish now is becoming a luxury. So the logic doesn't hold. Oh, let's eat lobster. It's Friday, and you don't eat meat. So the true meaning of it is lost, but the practice is remaining intact in many countries. There is also Hinduism that has a very important religious taboo, and this is not eating beef, because cows are sacred in India, and this is serious. You do not kill a cow if you are Hindu. Muslims and Christians in India will kill the cows, but and work with leather, but not Hindus. And the reason why cows are sacred, well, no one really knows. It is a very important animal in the Hindu cosmology. But why the cow? Why not the goat, the sheep, or any other animal? There are many hypotheses as why cows became sacred and not other animals. And it dates from thousands of years ago. Even in seals found in Pakistan and India, in the Indus Valley, dating from almost 5,000 years ago, show cows and cows sitting in a meditating position, like anthropomorphized cows. So they were already important at that time. Some anthropologists will tell that it is because cows are really important in agriculture and were really important in the past, even more in agriculture, before the invention of trucks and the ubiquity of farm trucks. All families needed their cows to plow the fields and harvest. So the cow was very important in subsistence. So you would not kill a cow and feast for a week and then starve your kids for years. That might be a reason why they became sacred. There are two very important prohibitions in Islam, and it's the prohibition of alcohol and drugs and pork. I will start with alcohol because this one is pretty straightforward and still makes sense today. It is prohibited because it impairs people's judgment. So Muslims went on the side of prohibition instead of moderation. There are many strategies you can take, but apparently the Prophet said that this should be prohibited because it makes people crazy, it impairs their judgment. So this is why alcohol is a taboo in Islam. Pork, this is more complex. When we ask any Muslim person, why don't you eat pork? What's the real reason? Most people will tell because it is dirty. It's a dirty animal, and it's actually true. Pigs are very dirty animals. So since cleanliness is very important in Islam, pigs became taboo for that, prohibited. They bring disease, the meat spoils quicker, etc. There might be another reason as well, which is the ecological reason, the logic reason. Islam is a pretty young religion, but the birthplace of Islam is Saudi Arabia, so in the Middle East, very dry place, desertic place. And it does not make economic sense to have pigs, to farm pigs in the desert, because pigs, even if they would eat anything, ideally to be healthy and to provide good meat, they eat nuts, roots, vegetables, fruit, the same thing as human beings. And if you have all these good things, you should give it to people, not to pigs, if you live in the desert. Same thing for water. Pigs need a lot of water to survive, and water is scarce in the desert, so it's better keeping it for human beings. Other animals make a lot of sense in the desert to be farmed, like sheep, goat, cattle, and these are not prohibited in Islam, but pigs became prohibited. So there is the ideological reason, it is dirty, but there is also the economic reason. It does not make sense to farm pigs in the desert. The Jewish religion has many food prohibitions. In fact, it's more simple to determine what Jews can eat than what they cannot. So as a Jewish person, if you have to choose an animal to eat, if it's a sea animal, it needs to meet two criteria. It needs fins and scales. If sea animals do not have fins and scales, you will not eat that animal. It's not permitted. It's not allowed. If it's a bird, it needs to fly. Birds that do not fly are not considered proper for human consumption. Chickens fly. It's okay for Jews to eat chicken. If it's a terrestrial animal, it needs to meet, again, 2 criteria. An animal must chew their cud and have split hooves, 2 toes. So animals that do not have these 2 criteria will not be eaten by the Jewish community. So it becomes pretty complex. But most of animals you can think of that would be prohibited, they're not sold anyways in supermarkets here. Like, okay, animals with no fins or scales, whales, seals, but there's also lobster, shrimp, seashells. These are prohibited too. For birds, well, maybe ostrich can't be eaten, penguins, but these are not things you find in supermarkets around you. For terrestrial animals, animals that do not meet the criteria are horses, dogs, cats, monkeys, rabbits, elephants. But these are not animals that you will have to eat around. Pigs don't meet the 2 criteria because they have split hooves, they have 2 toes, but they don't chew cud. So Jews do not eat pork either, just as Muslims. So among all the animals that they would not eat because they don't meet the criteria, only a few of them are commonly eaten in the Western world, and these are pigs and seashells. There's another, and there's no clear explanation as to why these animals are not eaten. They're considered abnormal, but it is written in the Torah. It's clearly indicated in the Torah to not eat these animals. Jews also will not, if they respect the religion well, they will not mix meat and milk in the same meal or in the same plate, depending. So milk includes all dairy products. So it depends. Some people will just not eat meat and dairy products in the same plate, but in some other Jewish communities, they're more strict, so they will not cook meat and dairy in the same cooking pots, or not even in the same kitchen sometimes. One of my students was working in a Jewish school in Montreal a few years ago, and he had 2 different, he was a cook, and he had a different stove for meat and the rest. So they were pretty strict about that. But most people don't care about the utensils and stoves and kitchens. They just care about what's in their plate. The reason for that, in the Torah, it is written that, okay, the exact English translation, I don't have it, but it says that you will not cook a baby goat, in its mother's milk. So the interpretation of it can be very diversified. You can interpret it as don't ask a mother to betray her children, or don't. There's many interpretations possible, as in any religious writing. But the official interpretation in the Jewish community is, well, don't cook meat in milk. It's not correct. The next component is feasting. I will go really quick here because everyone knows what feasting is. But in the context here, feasting means eating and drinking in community in a religious context. So think of Christmas dinner, Easter dinner, Hanukkah for Jews. Any holiday during which you eat good things will be considered feasting. The last one is sacrifice. Sacrifice does not necessarily mean you're killing something. You're killing an animal. It can involve killing an animal, but not necessarily. For example, in the Muslim community, there is a celebration of Eid that involves killing a lamb in a proper way and sharing the meat. You keep a little bit for yourself, you give a little bit to your family, you share with your family, and you share with the whole community as a gift. So this is an important holiday, and it involves sacrifice. It's the feast of sacrifice here. In the Christian community, people will perform what we call libations. This is the offering of a liquid. If you go to Cuba, to major cities, or well, pretty much anywhere, you will see old men, when they drink rum, they will put a little bit on the ground, para los santos, for the saints. This is a religious sacrifice. You give up something for spiritual reasons. Sacrifice is giving up something, not taking it for yourself. So here they give up alcohol. Rappers do the same thing. In the African American community, when people sometimes in parties, they will open a bottle of liquor, they will pour a little bit on the ground for the homies. This is libation. This is a ritual that lost its first religious meaning, but what they're performing is actually a libation which has roots in the Christian religion. Hindus will burn offerings. They will burn butter, spice, flowers, good things in fire. Fire is important in the Hindu religion because smoke brings things to the spiritual entities. All these 7 components are very important in religions, and sometimes some of them cross the frontier between the religious world and the secular world, the non-religious world. And I have an example here from a university I was teaching in the States. This is University of Maryland that you see here in the pictures. And you know how football is so important in American colleges. It is almost a religion, actually. So our football team was called the Maryland Terrapins. A terrapin is a diamond-backed turtle. And this is the turtle of the team that you see there. These are 2 brown statues of the turtle. One is in the library, the one on top, and the one at the bottom is at the stadium. And maybe it's not so clear in the picture, but the nose of the turtle is all shiny, because people rub the nose of the turtle before a game. Players will rub the nose of the turtle at the stadium, and the rest of students will use the library turtle because they don't have access to the turtle in the stadium. So that is an example of mana, but that is not religious anymore. It's in daily life. Also, the turtle at the library receives all sorts of offerings the day before a game, and generally it is food, drinks, good stuff. I've seen joints given to the turtle before a game. Okay, this is sacrifice. It's an example of sacrifice, but that has lost its religious meaning here. Besides these 7 components of religions we have just seen, there are 2 more that are really important. These 2 additional elements are myths and rituals. Religions are based on myths. Let's start with these. Myths are not necessarily all religious. Many of them are secular. They are not religious. But let's start with a definition of a myth. When I usually ask students what a myth is, I sometimes get answers like, it's a made-up story. It's a story that is not true. That's kind of part of the definition, but it's missing the most important aspect. Myths are stories, yes, about the supernatural, about gods, deities, supernatural forces, okay? Things that are beyond science, things that we can't explain, things that do not exist. Examples of myths? Noah's Ark in the Ancient Testament. The Ancient Testament is full of myths. It's a mythology. Every religions have their myth of creation, for example. So the Noah's Ark is part of it. So it's a Christian myth. A secular myth, a good example, is in French, La Chasse-Galerie, in Quebec, the flying canoe. This is the story of men in the early 20th century, until the early 20th century, who every winter were going to work as woodcutters deep in the woods, and they were staying there the whole winter from October to April, and they were missing their families and they could not visit even for Christmas. And one day the devil bargained with them that he would bring them to their family for Christmas on his flying canoe, but the man had to be back the morning after, otherwise they would sell their soul to the devil. This myth has a religious component, the devil, but it's a secular myth. It's not part of any religion. There are many myths around. Students mention Greek mythology, Norse mythology as examples. Rituals are also a very important component of religions, as they are an important component of the secular world. Rituals are coded, patterned behaviors that people usually do in society, but not always, and they're composed of symbolic activities. That's a very important element in the definition. They are symbolic. Each year I ask my students, name some examples of rituals. And each year someone says, brushing my teeth in the morning. It's not a ritual. That's a patterned activity. It's repetitive. You do that every day, but there's nothing symbolic. It's a routine, but we call it a ritual, but it is not a ritual according to the true meaning of it. So rituals are symbolic. As you see on the left in the picture, this is a pilgrims to the Mecca. This is a very important religious ritual. People have to go at least once in their lifetime to the Mecca, and they take the trip there, and there's a series of prayers they're doing. This is all part of a ritual. Halloween is coming in a few weeks, so this is also full of rituals. It's full of symbolism. Older students would go to Halloween parties with sexy costumes, and younger ones will do the trick-and-treat thing with princess costumes, with the jack-o'-lanterns, and it's full of symbol. It's full of patterned activities. So this is an example of secular ritual. There are many ways to classify rituals. I just gave you one way, religious versus secular. I will focus on another way to classify them. They're rites of intensification and rites of passage. This is a very easy twofold classification. Rites of intensification can be classified in many kinds of rituals. I will not cover that in this class, but we'll focus on the broad aspects of rites of intensification. They are there to maintain social solidarity within the group. This is very important. You remember Durkheim in his function of religion. Rites of intensification, by taking part into them, you reaffirm you are member of a group, or you support a group. You support the values and beliefs of the group. For example, the Gay Pride Parade that happens every year is a good example of secular rite of intensification. It's full of symbols. There are color codes. There's a dress code. There's specific music that always plays. Some songs always play at the Gay Pride Parade. And people, by participating, show their support or show they belong to the group. Another example would be the celebration of Canada Day, during which you express your pride of being Canadian, and it's full of symbols. There's a national anthem, there's a color code, there are visual symbols like the flag, the parliament, etc. Rites of passage mark important transitions in people's lives. And depending on the society you live in, these important stages of life will be different. Some societies will focus on, most societies focus on birth and death. But depending on the society, you might focus on puberty or adulthood. Sometimes it's the same thing, sometimes not. You will focus on old age, retirement. It depends on the society. But an important aspect of all rites of passage, they mark a transition, and they happen at important stages of life, like graduation, for example. Rites of passage mark a change in someone's social position, in someone's social status in life, place in society. For example, you go from nothing to a member of the society. You go from boy to adult, from the living to the death. So it's an important change in the stages of life. Often they're public, or at least one part of the rite of passage is public. It's important because the whole society is concerned when someone has a rite of passage, and they are very common cross-culturally. You'll see many examples in the next slides, but two examples here in Canada. When little babies are 1 year old, the smashing the cake thing is kind of a rite of passage, but that was influenced by the Latin community here. And I don't know if you are aware of this. That's a funny one. The screeching in ceremony for Newfoundlanders. That's a funny rite of passage, but it's interesting because it has the three phases of typical classic rites of passage. This happens when someone wants to become a Newfoundlander by adoption. It really happens in a pub or bar. During the first phase, you claim that you want to become a Newfoundlander, and then they bring you a live cod, or sometimes it's frozen, but ideally it's live or recently dead, and you have to kiss the cod on the mouth and drink a shot of alcohol. And then, this is the second part of it, and then finally you receive a certificate that claims that you are now a true Newfoundlander. Sometimes it's just something written quickly on a napkin, but at least there is a document there to prove it. That's a third phase of the rite of passage here. So, as I briefly mentioned, rites of passage have three phases. Sometimes some of the phases are lost through history, but originally, there are three phases to a rite of passage, and this was studied by Arnold van Gennep. According to him, the first phase of a rite of passage, which is called separation, happens when the old status of a person is taken away. As I said, rites of passage mark a change in someone's status in society. So when your old status, when you lose it, there's something symbolic happening. This is the first phase, the phase of separation. For example, here in the picture, you see this boy will become a monk in the Buddhist community. So for the first phase of this rite of passage of becoming a monk, he has his hair shaved. So what he's losing here physically is the hair, but symbolically it's the status of a normal boy that is taken away. He will undergo the long process of becoming a monk, and it starts with separating himself from his old social status. The second stage of a rite of passage is called transition. It is the most important stage, actually. It's when someone has no status. It's when someone is in between, in limbo between two status. You don't have your old status anymore, but you don't have your new status yet. You're in between. It's called the liminal stage. Limen means threshold in Latin. So it can be a very short stage, a few seconds, but it can be a very long stage, months sometimes. When the rite of passage is associated with something hard, with something painful, with ordeals, it generally happens during the transition phase. Doing something hard or inflicting pain to someone makes the new status to come more valuable, makes the person deserve the new status. For example, in some religions, when a boy is becoming a little bit older, there is a circumcision ceremony. So this is painful if there's no anesthesia. So it makes the boy show that he deserves the status of man that will come. He's tough enough. In some traditional societies, women will undergo scarifications before puberty or at puberty. That's a rite of passage to puberty generally. It makes them show that they deserve to become women, they're worth the title. So if they can go through the rite of passage, they will be able to go through childbirth after in life. Sometimes as well, rites of passage are associated with body modifications that happen at that stage, visible body modifications here. So it makes the new status of the person official and visible to the whole community. It makes things official. So if you get a tattoo or a scarification, or a wedding ring, it shows people that you have reached a new status. So this happens sometimes during the transition phase, sometimes during the incorporation phase, the third one that we will see. For example, if someone goes through a rite of passage to become a gang member, well, there's something hard to do, maybe beating up a member of a rival gang. So this is hard and dangerous, can be painful as well. And then you get a symbol from the gang. So this is the body modification, a tattoo, for example, that will show your new status. During the incorporation phase, the person officially has the new status. It's given, it's over. Generally, or very often, this third phase is associated with celebrations, with public parties. The Day of the Dead in Mexico can be considered a third phase of a rite of passage to death. It's a rite of passage surrounding death, so it's linked with funerals. During this day, there is a celebration for people who passed away, and especially for those who passed away in the last year. So it's to tell officially people that these persons have finally reached and officially reached the status of ancestors. They reached the other side now. They're gone. Now I will give you two examples of rites of passage to adulthood. One of them is a circumcision ceremony, and I put the video on Omnivox, so I encourage you to watch the 5 minutes video. It's from National Geographic. And the other one is from our Western society. It's a marriage. So the first one, I chose one that is as different from what we do as possible. It happens in the Xhosa community of South Africa. In the first phase, the boy is having his hair cut. So this is a symbol. It's the boyhood that they take away on top of the hair. It's a symbolism here. During the second phase, there's many things hard that happen to him. Well, first, the circumcision itself. Second, he cannot eat fresh food or drink water. So he's a little bit starved during at least 1 week. And the third thing that is not really fun during this time is isolation. He stays isolated in a camp during a full month. And the third phase shows a party, a public ceremony, during which he is officially given the new status of man because he went through the full rite of passage and was able to do it. Another example from our society would be a wedding, as it happened until, well, as it still happens. The separation phase of a marriage. What we could consider a separation phase would be a bachelor's party, both for men and women. But take the men example. Very often it happens in a bar or in a strip club. That's a symbol. That's symbolism to tell the man, you're losing your old status of a single man. Enjoy your last night as a single man. You won't do that anymore. You will become a respectable married man. Of course, the guy is going to go again to the strip club, but that's symbolic here. That's a symbol that's important. During the second phase, there is a ceremony. And that's very symbolic as well, this second phase. There is a clear transition, especially for the bride, because she enters the church with her father as a single woman, and she comes out of the church with her husband as a married woman. So it symbolizes, well, first, the lack of autonomy of women in traditional Christian society, but also it shows the clear transition from single to married. Also, there's a body modification that happens. There's a ring that's being given here. The third phase is, well, some students mention the honeymoon as a third phase, which is not crazy. You officially get your new status, or you finally enjoy your new status symbolically, because you probably enjoyed it before. But until a few generations ago, I would say until 40 years ago, the incorporation phase, the third phase of the marriage, was when the new couple integrated their new place, because couples could not live together before getting married. So getting a new home, a new place to live, with full of gifts from the family, was actually the third phase of it. The incorporation phase, how they obtained the new status. And there are many, many rites of passage around. And when I asked you to mention some examples, you found very good examples. Prom, getting your driver's license, having sex before turning 18, sweet 16, quinceañera, 21st birthday. You mentioned a lot of interesting rites of passage, actually. Rites of passage had a very important, well, they still have a very important function, but this function was even more important in the past, when there was no quick and efficient and widespread communication technology. Because the real goal of a rite of passage, of course, it's to have your new status as an individual, but it's to help you dealing with that and help the whole society around you dealing with that as well. Because when your own status changes, the life of everyone around might change as well. And they have to be aware of it. Okay, right now you break up with your girlfriend, and the second after, it's on Facebook, so your new status is visible to everyone by communication. But this is only recent in history. People needed to communicate their new status to everyone else in society. A good example of that, two good examples of that, are from the Latin American community. The first one, you see it on the left, it's a quinceañera. Girls, traditionally, when they turned 15, became adults. And people in the village or in the community had to be aware of it, because it was important. Parents were showing their daughter as an adult. That was a message to other people, this celebration. You can date her now. It's okay. She will be available for marriage. She's eligible for marriage because she's 15 years old. So that was a message for the whole community. The status of one person changes, but the life of the full community can be involved here. Same thing when a baby is 1 year old. In South America, in Central America, that's very, very important. There is a big party when it happens. And I've been in villages where when one baby there is turning 1 year old, there's no one sleeps that night. They rent a big speakers and they organize a fiesta that lasts all night, and no one sleeps. Anyways, the full village is invited to the fiesta. They kill a cow or a pig. So why is 1 year old so important? It's part of a rite of passage surrounding birth, and it has very ancient roots. It has roots when the infant mortality was very high in Latin America, because they were traditionally very poor communities. Right now, there's not, infant mortality is a problem that is behind for most of the countries. But until recently, it was a problem. It was an issue. So when a baby is 1 year old, it means that he or she will survive. The first year of a baby in a poor community is the most difficult year. It is when you have to, if you have to die, you will die during your first year generally as a baby. If there is no good hygiene around or medical care around. So that's why it was so important to wait 1 year to introduce the baby to the whole community as a new member. Of course, the baby is important from birth to the parents and the extended family, But at 1 year old, the baby becomes important to the whole community as an official new member that has passed through the most difficult year of life.